Hi, it's Hope and welcome to the video. As you can tell by the title and the thumbnail, this is going to be my October wrap-up and stats. I am also quickly going to say this is going to be kind of speed through round because I do not have that much time to film before I have to do something else. So just like describing the books will be really quickly and my thoughts will be really quick. I am sorry about that, but on a time crunch here. So first I will go through the stats and then talk about the books. So I'll pull up the stats, like a graphic right here, and we'll just go through it. So in October, I read 17 books, which totaled to 4,937 pages. My average star rating is a 4.2. I'm also looking down there because my laptop's down there with the stats. I listened to 4 audiobooks. I read 7 ebooks. I read 1 mixed, which means multiple formats. In this case, it was physical book and audiobook. And then I read 5 physical. 6 were adult, 1 was middle grade, 2 were new adult, and 8 were young adult. 1 was contemporary, 2 were erotic, 4 were fantasy, 1 was a graphic novel, 2 were horror, 3 were paranormal, 3 were romance, and 1 was sci-fi. So the first book I read this month, I technically started at the end of September, is A Court of Thorn and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. This, if you do not know what this is about, you're living under a rock. But this basically we follow Feyre, who she kills a wolf and she doesn't realize that this wolf is actually a fairy, and because she kills a fairy there is a punishment where she has to spend the rest of her days in the Fey lands to kind of like serve as a punishment. And this is a very, very popular like YA fantasy. The rest of the books in the series border new adult or adult. As you get into the series further, they're actually adult. But I love this series. I gave this 4.5 stars. I read it physically and also listened to the dramatized audiobook, which I highly recommend because it just adds so much to the story. And yeah, I don't really have much more to say. I'm so excited to be doing a reread of this series because it's one of my favorite series. I'm dying to read ACMAF, which is right there, which I'll be reading hopefully in November. The next book I read is A Spark Within the Forge by Sabaa Tahir. This I gave 3 stars, and this is an Ember in the Ashes prequel graphic novel. So it follows the characters from the An Ember in the Ashes series, but a few years before that series starts, which An Ember in the Ashes is kind of like a YA military fantasy. And so A Spark Within the Forge is like the prequel where we're following Laia, who is one of the characters in An Ember in the Ashes, and like her brother Darren as they are doing their things in their little like city, and which then leads to repercussions for the events in An Ember in the Ashes. I'm really struggling to describe that because it's difficult to describe this without describing just the entire Ember in the Ashes series, even though that takes place after these. But I enjoyed it. It was 3 stars because it was quick. I do like the art style, but for me it didn't feel necessary, but I did enjoy reading it. The next book I read is Between Perfect and Real by Ray Stoive. I forgot to look up how to pronounce that author's last name, but this is a YA contemporary that I gave 4 stars. Basically, we follow Dean, who ends up auditioning for his school play and gets the role as Romeo. But you wouldn't think anything of it, but Dean was actually assigned female at birth and still outwardly looks female, isn't out to anybody, and it's just the kind of story of him like kind of accepting like his gender, like coming out to people, and overall just playing the role of Romeo in Romeo and Juliet. And it's a very interesting story because I personally haven't really seen that many books where you see a trans character like pre-coming out. It's always after they've come out, or like the beginning stages of like, oh, they're out to like some people. But in this case, in the beginning, Dean is not out to anybody, and honestly at the beginning kind of isn't even out to himself. Which is a very interesting perspective to read as somebody that doesn't understand that, like doesn't understand those feelings. So yeah, The next book I read is The Titan's Curse by Rick Riordan. I had to read this for the Riordan Along, which is a read-along hosted by myself and Morgan from Morgan's Bookshelves. I'll leave our announcement videos linked below. But this I gave 4 stars. This is the 3rd book in the Percy Jackson and the Olympian series. The first book is The Lightning Thief, where basically we follow Percy Jackson, who discovers he's a demigod, which is like the child of a god. And it's just Greek mythology, really fun, middle grade. And I'm really enjoying reading these. I'm not really going to talk about these much more because there's an entire live show up on my channel talking about this, which I'll also leave linked below. Then I read The Ballad of Never After by Stephanie Garber. This is the sequel to Once Upon a Broken Heart, where we follow Evangeline Fox, who, when the boy she's in love with ends up marrying another, she ends up striking a deal with Jax, who is the Prince of Hearts, and revenge happens, and then Evangeline ends up having to travel to the Magnificent North, which is a different country in the world, to kind of participate in this competition for the Prince of the Magnificent North's hand in marriage. And that's a very crappy description, but The Ballad of Never After continues off with Once Upon a Broken Heart, and I gave this 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. Yes, the pacing was a little off, but I love the characters, the overall plot is good. I love the plot twist, and oh my god, the ending made me audibly scream and literally throw my phone across the room because I was so shocked, and I loved it. I'm dying for book 3, but it literally just got announced last month, so I'm gonna be waiting like another year for it, but I'm more than willing to wait it out because the series is just amazing so far. Next I read Trick by Shay Sanders. This was like a 30-page novella that my friend Reese recommended to me, and it's literally just 2 characters, I can't even remember their name, having a smutty time after going on a hayride together. And I gave this 3 stars because it wasn't good, it wasn't bad, you didn't really get much of the character development because it was only 30 pages, but I don't regret reading it, so moving on. The next book I read is Scythe by Neil Shusterman. This is a sci-fi, kind of more of a utopian, where death has been conquered, and to manage with the population, certain people are appointed being scythes, which basically they have the power to kill people. Like, they're the only people that can kill people, and we are following Citra and Rowan as they end up becoming apprentice scythes, and it's just their journey doing that as they are apprenticed 2 different ways. So you kind of see the various ways that scythes approach killing, or gleaning as they call it. And I gave this 5 stars. I really liked it. It was a reread for me, and I knew I was gonna love it. And I'm continuing the series here in November by reading Thunderhead, which I'm really excited to read. The next book I read is As Above, So Below by Dana Isley. This is a adult paranormal where we follow Branwen, who she's going to be the youngest priestess in her coven at only 27 years old, because she has the most powerful magic. But when she is betrayed by one of her friends, she ends up getting cast out of her coven, all of her powers stripped, and is just left to fend with her, is left to fend for herself in the world, when a demon named Roth comes to rescue her and take down her coven. And I really enjoyed this. I gave it 4 stars. It was really, really good. Definitely smutty, but also has a side of revenge. Our main character gets villainous towards the end, and I love that. Like, she's 100% morally gray, and I love that. But I will say with this, the trigger warnings are there for a reason. And overall, I just really enjoyed it and don't really have any thoughts. The next book I read is I Know What You Did Last Summer by Lois Duncan. This, basically, we follow 4 teens who did something the previous summer, and now the repercussions are happening. And this is the book that the 1997 movie came out? 1997, 1998, something like that. But, like, that movie is based on this book. And I give it 3 stars because it was written in what year? It was written in 1973, so a lot of the things are outdated and just were kind of harmful And overall, it just didn't grip me. I honestly would have DNF'd it if I wasn't listening to the audiobook. So I don't really have any other thoughts on that. The next book I read is JINXED by Tori Heat. This, basically we follow Savannah, who she purchases this like old home that she plans on making into a thrift shop. But little does she know that when she enters the house, she will never be able to leave and will be stuck there with 3 men who have been trapped there for, one has been trapped for over 100 years, one has been trapped for over 50 years, and one has been trapped for 30 years. And so she's stuck in there with them, and the 4 of them are trying to figure out a way to escape while also romances form. And it's like a why choose romance, so she ends up with all of them. And I like the first half of this book, I was like, okay, it's like meh. I'm sorry if the camera angle changed. I ended up getting an emergency alert on my phone. But as I was saying, by like halfway through the book, I was so invested that I was like, if anything happens to these characters, I don't know what I'm gonna do. So I did enjoy it. I gave it 4 stars, and I really enjoyed it. The next book I read is White Smoke by Tiffany D. Jackson. This is a like YA thriller horror where we follow Marigold, who she moves from a small California town to Cedarville, which is in like I think the Midwest or something, like for her mom's job. And when Marigold and her mother, brother, stepfather, and stepsister move into this house, things slowly start to seem weird as like things are moved around, misplaced, hearing creaking in the night. And Marigold is concerned about this, but everybody just brushes her off, and it is kind of the story that unfolds there. I really enjoyed this because it brings the fact of like anxiety into that, and like Marigold's past is very interesting, and overall I enjoyed it. I listened to the audiobook, so it really creeped me out. I gave it 5 stars because I enjoyed every single second of it, which obviously means it's really good. The next book I read is Kingdom of the Feared by Carrie Maniscalco. This is the 3rd and final book in the Kingdom of the Wicked trilogy, where in the first book we follow Amelia, who her twin sister Victoria is murdered, and Amelia just wants to figure out what happened, and in the process she ends up summoning a demon named Wrath, who is one of the 7 princes of hell, and the 2 of them end up trying to solve Victoria's murder. And I gave this 3.5 stars compared to the first 2 books in this series that I gave 5 stars. By this book, the plot just felt very messy, and there was no character development really beyond a few things that I can't really say because of spoilers. But I feel like if I would have reread the first 2 books, this would have been a little bit better. But I'm still glad that I read it because I finished up a series, and also I'm like, it's good. It was good enough that I gave it 3.5 stars. Honestly, I don't really have that many thoughts because a lot of my thoughts are just the writing was all over the place, the plot was all over the place, there was no actual conclusion, it felt like, to the story, and there was also felt like there was like the conflict got resolved really quickly, but I love the characters so much, so it kind of outweighs it, I guess. The next book I read is The Beast by Katie Robert. This is the 4th book in the Wicked Villain series, which is basically like smutty Disney retellings, and in The Beast we are following the kind of like story of Beauty and the Beast, but the characters are named Isabel, Gaten, and Beast, and it's the 3 of them kind of making an agreement, and like an agreement to save Isabel's family's territory of the city, and it's smutty, and it ends up with the 3 of them together. I gave this 4 stars because it was pretty good. I don't really have any thoughts except, damn, the smut is good. Katie Robert will never disappoint me with smut, pretty much. So yeah, I don't really have any thoughts except I absolutely love the Wicked Villain series. The next 2 books I'm not going to talk that much about because I am currently editing a reading vlog for this, and that is It Ends With Us and It Starts With Us by Colleen Hoover. It Ends With Us, we follow Lily, who she meets this guy named Ryle, and the 2 of them kind of form a relationship that goes downhill very quickly. And we also are seeing letters that were written by Lily when she was 15, talking about her meeting this boy named Atlas and essentially saving his life, and kind of how she fell in love with him, but then also present day as she's falling in love with Ryle and their relationship. And then it starts with us, kind of continues the story, but I don't really want to say much more because it'll spoil this, but I have an entire reading vlog coming out hopefully in the next few days of me reading both of these, but I gave both of them 5 stars. That's not a spoiler, and overall I loved them because you might as well say this is the trauma and this is the happiness afterward, and I just loved both of these. I am a sucker for Colleen Hoover books. I don't care what people say, I will love her books, as I think the lowest I've ever rated one of her books is 4 stars, but I think I've had more 5-star reads from her than anything else. So yeah. And then I read Scream for Us by Molly Doyle. This is a erotic Halloween novella where essentially we follow Quinn, who goes to a Halloween party and then ends up meeting these 3 guys in masks who give her a very fun night. That's all I'll describe, but I gave this 4 stars. I'm gonna say this and you're gonna think I'm crazy. People that don't know what I'm talking about are gonna think I'm crazy. I'll just have 2 words that just put all my thoughts. Ghost Daddy. If you know, you know. If you don't, how's your mental health doing? Because mine's fucked after this book, but I loved it so much. It was exactly what I wanted, just like a smutty Halloween novella that is just like, let's just put it that way. So yeah. And then the final book I read was Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas. I actually listened to the audiobook of this, so now I can say I've read it all formats. But essentially this, we follow Yadriel, who ends up summoning a ghost he can't get rid of. Basically his traditional Latinx family is kind of struggling to accept his identity as he's a trans guy, and his family doesn't believe he's a real brujo because of the fact he's trans. So Yadriel ends up summoning a ghost that originally he was trying to summon the ghost of his cousin. Yadriel ends up instead summoning the school's resident bad boy Julian, and Yadriel and his cousin Marcia have to find a way to get rid of Julian and kind of like help Julian pass over into the afterlife, while proving that Yadriel is a real brujo. And yeah, this is the 3rd time I've read this. I loved it so much. I read this because this is the October pick for the Late Night Bookworming Book Club. The live show will be on the 12th of November. I'll leave the Twitter down below. The Twitter's always in my description. But yeah, I'm very, very excited to talk about this because this was one of my favorite books of 2020 and I read it every single year. And this year I actually read it with a timeline, which was a beautiful thing to do because you're like, oh, these events are actually happening, and you kind of understand the timeline a little bit more. And overall, I just love Aiden Thomas's books. So yeah. But those are all the books that I read this month. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what is one book that you read in October, or what's one read in November you want to read. But I really hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help my channel grow. And bye!